Yeshua Bar Yosef existed. Historically, what can we say about him? That he was from a northern Israelite lineage, natural-born son of Mary and Joseph. Was a preacher who had a following, who was crucified under Pontius Pilate, died, and the body went missing, and his following increased after his death, to the point of people less than 100 years later being tortured to death because they believe he resurrected. They're not all fraudulent. There's a case with some manuscripts of Josephus, and there's about a half of a sentence that is most likely interpolation. But there are no copies of Josephus that don't talk about Jesus. And also Jesus gets mentioned in another part, being the brother of James, another upstart. We have Tacitus, Pliny, Josephus, Suetonius, although Suetonius is kind of late. We have the four Gospels. Now you need to remember, you have Mark and John that are written independently. And then you have Matthew and Luke, which are Gospels that were written by people who did not like each other. They were using Q source, but they were countering each other. They used Mark as a template, but Matthew is probably written after Mark, and Luke wrote Luke to counter Matthew. You have the Pauline writings, which are the earliest, and you have anti-Pauline writings. You have pseudonymous Pauline writings, which try to mediate Paul, or culturalize Paul, Romanize Paul. It talks about the household, marriage, hierarchy, this type of thing. So you have Pauline writings, anti-Pauline writings. You have writings that are just weird, that we don't know where they come from. The earliest stuff, with the exception of the Didache and possibly Barnabas, the Epistle of Barnabas, the 27 canon that the West has of the New Testament is the earliest stuff. You have the four bios, the four biographies, and why do you think they don't jive? I mean, the the New Testament is the earliest attested to document from antiquity, and it's the most widely attested to. Bart Ehrman, an atheist, someone who despises and attacks Christianity and the church, is irritated that he came across people who thought Jesus didn't exist. This is very silly. None of the detractors said he didn't exist. None. You have writings just after the writings of the New Testament. Ignatius of Antioch, written in between 100 and 115. Multiple letters. You have no later than AD 98, Clement of Rome. You have the Nero persecution. Again, Pliny's letter to Trajan. These Christians, how did Christianity begin? They all agree. And they all say the same story. Jesus, of Nazareth. He's crucified under Pontius Pilate. Every piece of archaeology that we come across confirms the story. There are many things that they say, oh, well, see, this shows that there was medieval, screwing around with it. Like, when the parable of, building a vineyard, you'd build a wall around it, build a watchtower, and then, do the planting. And they said, that doesn't make sense. And then they found it. Does this prove the deity of Christ? No. An apocalyptic preacher walking around Palestine for about 3 years who gets crucified. There's a lot written about him, especially by the detractors, by the enemies. There's the Jews that write about him. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about him in the Talmud. Negative stuff. You have the Romans and the pagan Romans and the pagan Greeks. And remember, the church back then, I mean, it's not like somebody carried around a copy of the Bible. Many of these texts were competing. We don't get the Bible that you think of, the Old and New Testament that you think of, until about 500 years ago. Less than 500 years ago, actually. The New Testament canon, actually, in the East, still, there's no agreed upon. The Eastern Orthodox will not read the Apocalypse of John in church. The Moratorian canon, I can go into that, but any credible historian, I mean, it's ridiculous. The Robert Prices and the what's that guy's name? The feminist guy, I forget his name. Richard Carrier. When backed into a corner, they admit, yeah, Jesus existed. Done this on several occasions, but they say these things to sell books. Use Occam's razor. How did Christianity begin? Well, we have this wealth, this multitude of writings. Go to earlychristianwritings.com. It has pretty much everything from the first 300 years. And you have competing schools. There's not just the Gnostics. Within what we would call the church, some of the church fathers disagreed with each other. Some of the books in the New Testament were written to counter other books in the New Testament. You have the 7 authentic letters of Paul. You have Mark. You have John. The reason why I'm not saying Luke and Matthew as well is because they used Mark as a template. But Mark and John weren't looking at each other. They seemed to not know the other existed. You have things that historians love. So you need to understand the historical method. But Jesus or Christ, I hate the word Jesus. I hate the name Jesus. Jesus. I just say Christ. Is the most widely attested to historical character. I mean, more than Buddha, more than Muhammad. I know I'll get a lot of flack for that, but everything about Muhammad was written extremely late, hundreds of years after. More than Alexander the Great. Now, I believe in documentary hypothesis. I don't think Moses wrote the Pentateuch. I think there's obviously 4 different writers. I think King David was evil. That the Book of Kings is it's historical, but it's propaganda. I mean, the history of it matches up with everything that we find, like the Moabite stone, the Tel Dan stela, I'm blanking on the other things. All matches up, but there's also propaganda. I mean, King David and King Solomon were evil sons of bitches. Probably we diagnose them as sociopaths today or psychopaths. But Jesus, I use that name again. I'll call him Jesus just because I fucking hate that name. Yes, he existed. Historically. Actually, historically. He's a human being. Son of Mary and Joseph. He had brothers and sisters. We have writings from within the first century talking about him. Why would somebody make this up? Why would we have accounts that differ, that talk about his life, that view his mission as, well, he's this or he's that, but many events are there. I mean, all of them attest to him being crucified under Pontius Pilate for years and years and years. The minimalists for centuries. Pontius Pilate didn't exist. Oh, where do you find his name? This thing dedicated to him, his name's on it. The Josephus controversy again. Tecton TV does a great job at smacking down people who try to claim, it's all a forgery. No, what happened was you had an apocalyptic preacher that went around, got himself crucified because of Palm Sunday, basically, because the way he entered Jerusalem was just like Judas Maccabeus. So they said, enough with this. They crucify him. They take the body down because it's Sabbath, because he's already dead, because they beat the shit out of him beforehand. The body disappears. And his followers believe that he's resurrected. And they go out. And they get tortured and killed. And the followers of the followers get tortured and killed. And the followers of the followers of the followers get tortured and killed. And this spreads. People dying for it. I mean, Ignatius of Antioch knew John. Clement of Rome knew Peter and Paul. There was nothing to gain by being a Christian. And you had everything to lose. And we find many disinterested quotes and comments and even mentions of him. I mean, Mara Bar Serapion, just traveling through. I mean, just this year, the Smithsonian uncovered what is probably an eyewitness account of Christ. I don't like the name Jesus. I hate Jesus. Jesus. Can't stand it. Talking about this wonder worker or sorcerer, Jesus of Nazareth, he calls him. And, just a paragraph within the multitude of his writings. This is a Roman soldier that was going to Persia and come back, this officer. And the dating of the carbon dating puts it right there. Puts it right in his lifetime. If I weren't so friggin' tired, I mean, just earlychristianwritings.com. Or just read the Bible. Not the Bible, just read the four Gospels. You can see that many of them are competing with each other. Matthew took a look at Mark and said, screw this, and Judaized the hell out of it. Then Luke, using Q and the template of Mark, tried to slam Matthew. But then you have John, which is a source independent from all of those. So Mark and John you have very early. And if you read them, they read as historical things. They don't read as religious texts. They read as typical history. This is what history looks like. I guess I'll do a part 2 of this. Peace to you.